In the grim darkness of the far future, there exists a scenario so absurd, so monumentally frustrating, and yet so inevitable that it has played out across dozens of tomb worlds throughout the galaxy. Picture this. You are an ancient being, a creature of living metal, who once ruled the stars when the ancestors of mankind were still crawling in primordial slime. You and your dynasty entered the Great Sleep 60 million years ago, retreating into stasis crypts beneath worlds specifically chosen for their desolation, their lack of appeal to any thinking species that might arise during your long hibernation. You programmed your tomb systems with meticulous care, installed defense protocols that would make any rational being think twice about disturbing your rest, and settled into your sarcophagus with the certainty that when you awakened, the galaxy would be ready for reclamation. Now imagine opening your optical sensors after eons of dreamless sleep to discover that your tomb, your sacred resting place, has been invaded, not by some worthy foe wielding technology that might approach your own magnificence, not by cunning Eldar seeking to destroy you while you slumbered, or cautious humans accidentally stumbling upon your location. No, you awaken to find your tomb occupied by Orks, green-skinned fungal barbarians who have not only broken into your carefully sealed chambers, but have apparently been using them as living quarters, perhaps for months or even years. They have looted your artifacts, defaced your walls with crude graffiti, filled your ancient corridors with the stench of fungal spores and exhaust fumes from their ramshackle vehicles. They have turned your monument to technological perfection into something resembling a scrapyard. This is not a hypothetical scenario. This has happened, is happening, and will continue to happen across the galaxy as more Necron tomb worlds stir to wakefulness. The clash between the oldest and most technologically advanced species in the galaxy and the most numerous, aggressive, and fundamentally irrational force in the universe creates a conflict that defies conventional military logic. It is a collision between ancient pride and modern chaos, between calculated perfection and joyful destruction, between a species that remembers when they ruled the stars and a species that does not care about anything except fighting, looting, and fighting some more. To understand why this scenario plays out with such regularity, and why it inevitably results in battles of apocalyptic scale, we must examine both parties to this cosmic farce. We must understand the nature of Necron tomb worlds, their construction, their defenses, and their purpose. We must also comprehend the Ork psyche, their cultural imperative to loot everything not nailed down, and then loot the nails as well, and their complete inability to recognize when they have made a catastrophically bad decision. Only then can we truly appreciate the horror, the fury, and yes, the dark comedy inherent in the moment when a Necron lord first realizes his tomb has become an Ork settlement. The silent tombs, architecture of eternity. The Necron tomb worlds represent the pinnacle of an ancient civilization's technological achievement, the product of minds that had mastered the fundamental forces of the universe and bent them to their will. These are not mere bunkers or storage facilities. They are vast, planet-spanning complexes that utilize physical principles unknown to any other species, employing technologies that make even the Imperium's greatest creations look like crude mechanical toys by comparison. Each tomb was constructed according to precise specifications developed over millennia of Necrontier civilization, refined and perfected before the biotransference that transformed flesh into living metal. The builders knew they would be sleeping for millions of years, knew that geological forces and cosmic events might threaten their rest, knew that other species might arise and potentially discover their locations. Every design choice was made with these considerations in mind, creating structures intended to endure when stars had burned out and galaxies had drifted apart. The physical layout of a tomb world defies conventional architecture. Using their mastery of interdimensional geometry, the Necrons created chambers that occupy spaces seemingly larger than their physical dimensions should allow. A single corridor might extend for kilometers while occupying a space that appears to be mere meters from the outside. Stasis crypts, holding thousands of warriors, are stacked in configurations that should be physically impossible, yet function perfectly. Their occupants, preserved in a state between existence and non-existence, neither truly alive nor dead, but suspended in a quantum state that defies easy description. These chambers are carved from materials that have no equivalent in the arsenals of younger races. Necrodermis, the living metal that makes up Necron bodies, is also the primary building material for their tombs. It is self-repairing, capable of reconfiguring itself at the molecular level to seal breaches or reshape damaged sections. The walls themselves possess a form of rudimentary consciousness, able to respond to threats and coordinate with the tomb's defensive systems. Scratch the surface of a tomb wall and watch as the damage slowly heals, metal flowing like liquid to restore pristine perfection. Deeper within the tomb complexes, beyond the outer chambers where warriors and lesser constructs rest, lie the sanctums of the Necron nobility. These are not merely larger or more ornate versions of the standard crypts. They are chambers of true majesty, decorated with the accumulated treasures of civilizations that rose and fell before humanity learned to make fire. Here rest the overlords and pharaohs, the lords of dynasties that once commanded star systems, their sarcophagi wrought from exotic metals and adorned with gems that capture and refract light in ways that hurt to look upon. Each noble's resting place is a work of art, a statement of power and position that will endure for eternity. The technological systems that maintain a tomb world operate on principles that seem like magic to those unfamiliar with their workings. Power flows through conduits that exist partially in other dimensions, drawing energy from sources that may be light years away or may not exist in conventional spacetime at all. The chronostats that regulate the awakening process measure time not in mere seconds or years, but in cosmic cycles, calibrated to account for the slow drift of galaxies and the minute fluctuations in the fundamental constants of physics. Backup systems have backup systems, each one capable of maintaining the tomb's basic functions for millions of years, even if the primary systems fail catastrophically. The defense protocols, built into every tomb world, represent paranoia elevated to an art form. The Necrons knew they would be vulnerable during their long sleep, knew that their ancient enemies, the Eldar, would hunt them, knew that other threats might arise. The defensive systems they installed reflect this awareness. Some are simple, automated weapons platforms that track movement and eliminate threats with Gauss fire or Tesla lightning. Others are far more sophisticated, dimensional traps that transport intruders into pocket realities from which there is no escape, temporal fields that age organic matter to dust in seconds, phase shifters that can cause entire sections of the tomb to become intangible and drop invaders into solid bedrock. Yet for all their sophistication, these defenses share a common assumption. They were designed to counter rational threats, creatures that would recognize warning signs and withdraw, or that would probe defenses cautiously and retreat when resistance proved too strong, or that would at least attempt to understand what they were dealing with before committing to an assault. This assumption, this belief that any species capable of breaching a tomb's outer defenses would possess some measure of intelligence and self-preservation instinct, represents the one true weakness in the Necron defensive strategy. It never occurred to them that they might face an enemy so fundamentally irrational that warnings would be ignored, danger would be met with enthusiasm, and the discovery of advanced alien technology would be treated not as something to be cautious about, but as an opportunity for looting. The stasis systems themselves are marvels of engineering that border on the miraculous. To maintain a consciousness, an uploaded mind within a mechanical body, in a state of perfect preservation for millions of years, requires more than mere cryogenic freezing or electromagnetic suspension. The Necrons achieved something far more profound. They created a form of temporal stasis that removes the occupant from the normal flow of cause and effect. A Necron in stasis is not merely asleep or unconscious. They exist in a state where time, for them, does not pass at all. From their perspective, closing their optic sensors at the start of the Great Sleep and opening them at its end are the same moment, with no duration between them. This is why awakening Necrons are often disoriented, why it takes them time to adjust to the reality of their situation. 60 million years have passed for the universe, but for them, no time has passed at all. This temporal manipulation extends throughout the tomb structure, creating zones where time flows at different rates or in different directions entirely. Repair chambers exist in temporal loops, allowing damaged Necrons to be restored to full function by literally reversing the flow of time around their bodies. Storage vaults hold weapons and artifacts in stasis fields where entropy itself cannot touch them, preserving armaments as pristine as the day they were forged millions of years ago. Command centers utilize time acceleration fields, allowing the tomb's controllers to process vast amounts of information and make strategic decisions in what appears to outside observers as mere seconds. The awakening protocols themselves are complex beyond measure. In theory, the return to function should be smooth and coordinated. The tomb's central intelligence first activates, running diagnostic checks on critical systems and assessing the state of the outside world through sensor arrays that have remained active throughout the long sleep. Once conditions are deemed favorable, the awakening begins with the lowest tier units, basic warrior constructs, simple-minded but reliable, who can handle any immediate threats while higher functions come online. As these warriors secure the immediate area, more sophisticated systems activate. Command nodes, weapon systems, shield generators, all coming online in carefully orchestrated sequence. Next come the specialized constructs, canoptek spiders to oversee repairs, scarabs to handle maintenance, tomb blades to patrol the perimeter. Only after all these systems are functional does the awakening extend to the immortals, the elite infantry, and finally to the nobility themselves. An overlord should awaken to find his forces already deployed, his tomb secured, his systems at full readiness. This is how it should work. This is what the ancient protocols dictate. But the Great Sleep was not as smooth as planned. 60 million years is an almost incomprehensible span of time. Stars have been born and died during the Necron's slumber. Continents have shifted. Oceans have evaporated. Atmospheres have changed composition. Some tombs have fared better than others, but none have escaped the ravages of time entirely. Chronostats have malfunctioned, causing some tombs to awaken far earlier than planned, while others remain dormant still. Stasis fields have failed, destroying their occupants in cascade collapses that wiped out entire legions. Power systems have degraded, leaving portions of tombs dark and dead. Whole dynasties have been lost to time, their tombs now cold and silent, their inhabitants never to awaken. Even in functioning tombs, the awakening process is fraught with complications. Some warriors emerge from stasis with degraded memory engrams, unable to recall their purpose or recognize their commanders. Others suffer damage to their behavioral protocols and exhibit erratic or even violent behavior toward their fellow Necrons. The nobility often find their strategic databases outdated and their understanding of the galaxy's current state woefully inadequate. Maps show star systems that have changed beyond recognition, allies that no longer exist, enemies that have been extinct for epochs. Adjusting to this new reality, while simultaneously managing the awakening process and defending the tomb from immediate threats, places enormous strain on even the most capable overlord. It is into this complex, vulnerable moment, when systems are still coming online and the Necron forces are not yet at full strength, that the Orks often intrude. Through sheer bad luck, monumentally bad timing, or what might be considered cosmic irony, the Orks tend to arrive at the absolute worst possible moment for the tomb's defenders. Perhaps their presence is what triggered the awakening in the first place, their digging and looting causing enough disruption to activate dormant security systems. Or perhaps they arrived months or years ago, before any awakening began, and have been systematically stripping the tomb's outer defenses while the inhabitants slumbered on, unaware of the violation taking place above them. The Green Tide, understanding the Orks. To comprehend why the Ork invasion of Necron tombs is so inevitable, so recurring, and so catastrophic, one must first understand the Ork species itself. They are not merely another alien race among many in the galaxy's crowded roster of intelligent life. The Orks are something fundamentally different, a species that operates according to rules that make sense only to them, whose psychology is so alien and yet so simple that it defies conventional understanding. The Orks were created, engineered by the ancient Old Ones during the War in Heaven, as biological weapons against the Necrontyr and their Khatan masters. They were designed to be the perfect soldiers, endlessly aggressive, capable of thriving in any environment, able to reproduce quickly and adapt to any threat. The Old Ones created them to fight the Necrons specifically, though whether they succeeded in that original mission is debatable. What is certain is that the Old Ones created something that would outlive them, outspread them, and ultimately become one of the greatest threats in the galaxy. The Orks' biology is as much fungal as animal, a hybrid organism that reproduces through spores released constantly throughout their lives, and especially upon death. This means that Orks never truly go extinct. Even if every Ork on a world is killed, their spores will lie dormant in the soil, in the ruins, in the very air, waiting for conditions favorable enough to germinate. Within years, new Orks will emerge, smaller and more primitive at first, but quickly growing larger and more sophisticated as their numbers increase and they fight among themselves. This is why Ork infestations are so difficult to eradicate completely. It is not enough to kill the Orks themselves. You must sterilize entire planets, burning away every trace of organic matter to ensure no spores survive. Few civilizations have the resources or ruthlessness required for such thoroughgoing extermination. But it is not their biology alone that makes Orks such a persistent threat. It is their psychology, their fundamental approach to existence, that truly sets them apart. Orks live for war, not metaphorically, not as a cultural value or societal imperative, but as a biological need, as real as eating or breathing. Fighting is not something Orks do, it is what they are. An Ork that is not fighting or preparing to fight, or thinking about fighting, is an Ork that is fundamentally unfulfilled, disconnected from its essential nature. This is why Orks will fight anything, including each other, if no other enemies are available. Peace, for an Ork, is not a desirable state, but a temporary inconvenience to be ended as soon as possible. This love of combat extends to their technology and their society. Everything Orks create is designed with violence in mind. Their vehicles are weapons platforms first and transportation second, bristling with guns and covered in armor plates welded on at random angles. Their buildings are fortifications, their settlements are armed camps, their culture is built around the celebration of martial prowess and the accumulation of trophies taken from defeated enemies. To call Ork society militaristic would be an understatement. Military considerations are not part of Ork society. They are the entirety of it. Their social structure is brutally simple. The biggest, strongest Ork is in charge until someone bigger and stronger comes along to take over. There are no elections, no hereditary succession, no complex political maneuvering. Leadership is determined by physical dominance, and that leadership lasts only as long as the leader can maintain that dominance through force. This creates a society in constant flux, where loyalties shift constantly and power struggles can erupt at any moment. Yet paradoxically, it also creates a stable system, because every Ork knows exactly where they stand and what they need to do to improve their position, get bigger, and fight harder. The Orks' technological prowess is one of the great mysteries of the galaxy, a subject that has baffled Imperial savants and Mechanicus tech priests for millennia. Ork technology should not work. Their weapons are crude assemblages of scrap metal held together with rivets and hope. Their vehicles lack proper fuel systems, adequate coolant, or any safety mechanisms whatsoever. Their tools are mismatched. Their ammunition is often the wrong caliber for their guns. Their electronics are wired in ways that should cause immediate short circuits and catastrophic failure. And yet, somehow, Ork technology works. Not reliably, not safely, not efficiently by any conventional measure, but it works. The secret lies in the Orks' latent psychic ability, a collective field generated by their very belief that their technology should function. If enough Orks believe that a gun will fire, it will fire, even if the mechanism is fundamentally flawed. If Orks believe that painting something red makes it go faster, then red vehicles do go faster when Orks are using them, because the Orks' collective unconscious makes it so. This is not something the Orks are consciously aware of. They simply know that their technology works and never question why. This psychic field is why captured Ork weapons often fail to function properly in the hands of other species, and why Mechanicus attempts to reverse engineer Ork technology so frequently end in frustration. Central to Ork culture is the practice of looting. This is not mere theft or scavenging, though it includes those elements. For Orks, looting is a fundamental mode of interaction with the universe. Everything that exists is potential loot, and everything that is looted is improved by its acquisition by Orks. It does not matter who the original owner was, what the object's intended purpose might be, or whether the Orks have any use for it at all. If it exists and can be carried or dragged away, it will be looted. The Deathskulls clan has elevated this practice to a religious observance, but all Orks engage in it to some degree. This looting behavior serves multiple purposes in Ork society. Obviously, it provides raw materials and useful equipment, but it is also a form of social interaction, a way of establishing dominance and accumulating status. An Ork with lots of loot is clearly more successful than one without, therefore more worthy of respect and followers. Loot can be traded, gambled, stolen from fellow Orks, modified, combined with other loot, or simply hoarded as a display of wealth and power. The process of looting is often more important than the actual utility of the looted goods. What makes Orks particularly dangerous when encountering ancient alien sites is that they lack any sense of caution or self-preservation when it comes to potential loot. A human exploring ancient ruins might notice warning signs, energy readings that suggest active defenses, architectural features that indicate danger. The human would proceed carefully, map the site, analyze potential threats. The Ork sees none of this, or more accurately, sees it and simply does not care. Ancient alien site means ancient alien loot, and the bigger the warnings, the better the loot must be. This logic is flawless from the Ork perspective. Why would anyone put up big warnings unless they were protecting something really good? This complete absence of appropriate fear response means that Orks will blunder into situations that would give any rational being pause. They will ignore radiation warnings because they have no understanding of radiation beyond makes you feel a bit wobbly for a day or two. They will bypass sophisticated security systems through the simple expedient of us, smashing them with hammers or shooting them until they stop working. They will spring traps that were designed to deter intruders and simply shrug off the consequences, treating near-death experiences as minor inconveniences rather than warnings to turn back. The Ork approach to archaeology, if one can call it that, is devastatingly effective in its simplicity. Where a careful explorer might spend weeks studying an ancient door, looking for the proper way to open it safely, an Ork will try to force it open. If that doesn't work, the Ork will hit it with something heavy. If that doesn't work, the Ork will blow it up. One of these approaches will eventually succeed, and from the Ork perspective, the result is the same. The door is open, and the loot is accessible. The fact that the explosion may have destroyed valuable artifacts or triggered defensive systems is irrelevant. The door is open. That's what matters. When Orks gather in sufficient numbers, they generate what is known as a battle cry, though it is much more than mere words or vocalization. It is a psychic phenomenon, a manifestation of the Orks' collective will to fight that resonates through the warp and affects reality itself. During such an event, Orks become stronger, faster, more resilient. Their weapons hit harder, their vehicles move quicker, their natural toughness increases to supernatural levels. The effect grows stronger as more Orks participate, creating a positive feedback loop where success breeds more success, drawing more Orks to join the fighting and making the entire horde more effective. This battle enthusiasm is particularly problematic when Orks encounter Necrons, because the ancient warriors represent exactly the sort of enemy that Orks find most appealing. They are tough, requiring sustained effort to destroy. They are numerous enough to provide plenty of targets. They have interesting technology that can be looted. They keep getting back up after being knocked down, providing entertainment value that simple kills lack. And perhaps most importantly from the Ork perspective, They take the fight seriously, engaging in proper warfare, rather than running away or surrendering. A Necron tomb, once discovered, represents the ultimate playground for Ork aggression. Endless fighting, endless loot, and enemies that will keep coming until one side or the other achieves complete victory. The Ork social system, while simple in its fundamental premise of might makes right, creates interesting dynamics when a large force occupies a fixed location, like a Necron tomb. The biggest Ork becomes the boss of the group, but below him exists a complex hierarchy of sub-bosses, each controlling their own mob of boys, each jockeying for position and resources. This means that even when not fighting external enemies, the Ork occupation force is constantly engaged in internal disputes, small wars between rival mobs, and competitions to see who can loot the best stuff or claim the best territory within the tomb. These internal conflicts actually help the Ork occupation survive longer than it otherwise might. When the tomb's defenses first activate, they often target the largest concentration of Orks or the most obvious threats. But because the Orks have spread out, fighting among themselves and exploring different sections of the tomb, the initial defensive response often fails to eliminate the entire infestation. Some mobs survive the first counterattack, retreat deeper into the tomb, or consolidate in defensible positions, and become much harder to root out. What should have been a quick extermination becomes a prolonged campaign of tomb clearing, with Orks hiding in side passages, laying ambushes from looted side rooms, and generally making complete nuisances of themselves. The discovery. How Orks find tomb worlds. The question of how Orks manage to discover Necron tomb worlds with such regularity is one that has puzzled Imperial strategists and Eldar farseers alike. On the surface, it should not happen as often as it does. Necron tomb worlds were specifically chosen for their isolation and lack of resources that might attract colonization. They are often dead worlds, barren rock, with minimal atmosphere, and no obvious assets worth exploiting. The Necrons went to great lengths to ensure their resting places would remain undisturbed, selecting worlds that other species would have no reason to visit, let alone settle. Yet the Orks find them anyway, with a frequency that suggests something more than random chance at work. The reasons for this are multiple and complex, involving both the nature of Ork expansion patterns and the simple reality that 60 million years is enough time for geological and stellar events to change everything about a world's location and appearance. First, there is the matter of sheer Ork numbers. There are more Orks in the galaxy than can be accurately counted. They infest thousands of worlds, range through sectors of space in massive fleets, and constantly push outward into new territories, looking for fresh enemies to fight and new things to loot. This means that Orks end up exploring vast reaches of space that more cautious species would ignore. While the Imperium focuses its colonization efforts on worlds with obvious value, and the Eldar restrict themselves to craft worlds and maiden worlds, the Orks will investigate any world they happen to encounter, regardless of its apparent lack of worth. An Ork fleet traveling through a system might detect unusual readings from a seemingly dead world and decide to investigate simply because they have nothing better to do at the moment, and fighting among themselves is getting boring. What they find might be a Necron tomb world, dormant and seemingly abandoned, with only subtle energy signatures to indicate anything unusual about it. To a more sophisticated species, these energy readings might suggest caution, might trigger recognition of advanced technology that should be reported to higher authorities and investigated carefully. To Orks, strange energy readings mean potential loot, and potential loot means it's time to start digging. The Orks' complete lack of scientific understanding actually works in their favor here. They do not recognize Necron technology as Necron technology. They do not see ancient alien warning markers as warnings, but rather as interesting decorations that might be worth prying off walls. They do not understand that unusual geometric patterns in rock formations indicate deliberately constructed chambers far below the surface. They simply see a world that looks like it might have stuff to loot, and that's enough reason to land and start exploring. Sometimes the discovery is even more direct. Necron tomb worlds occasionally feature surface structures, monuments, or sensor arrays or defense installations that remained above ground when the majority of the tomb complex delved deep below. 60 million years of exposure to the elements has weathered these structures, but they remain visibly artificial, clearly the product of advanced technology. To an Ork scout ship passing through the system, these structures are like a flashing sign that reads, "Valuable stuff. Come and get it." The fact that the structures are also defended by automated weapon systems is not a deterrent, but rather confirmation that the loot must be really good if someone went to such trouble to protect it. Certain Ork groups, particularly the Death Skulls clan, have developed something approaching expertise in finding places to loot. While they lack formal archaeological training or theoretical understanding of alien civilizations, they have accumulated vast practical experience in recognizing the signs of potentially rich looting grounds. A Death Skull. Nob might not understand what a Necron glyph means, but he knows that walls covered in glyphs usually have good stuff behind them. He cannot read Necron warning markers, but he has learned that symbols which repeat frequently are worth paying attention to, if only because they seem to indicate important locations. This practical expertise, combined with Ork stubbornness and their fundamental inability to recognize when they are out of their depth, means that once Death Skulls decide a location is worth investigating, they will investigate it thoroughly. If they encounter defenses, they bring more boys. If those defenses are particularly tough, they go get more powerful weapons. If the weapons prove inadequate, they modify them or build new ones. At no point does it occur to them that perhaps they should not be here, that perhaps they have stumbled upon something too dangerous to meddle with. The concept of too dangerous to loot does not exist in the Ork worldview. Geographic changes also play a role in Ork discovery of tomb worlds. A world that was carefully chosen for its isolation 60 million years ago may no longer be isolated at all. Stellar drift has shifted star systems relative to one another. Trade routes that did not exist when the Necrons went to sleep now pass through nearby systems, and the galaxy's spiral arms have rotated enough that regions once on the outskirts of civilization now sit squarely in contested space. A tomb world that was once days or weeks of warp travel from the nearest inhabited system might now be practically on a major shipping lane, simply because the galactic geography has changed so dramatically over the eons. Environmental changes on the tomb worlds themselves sometimes expose the tombs to discovery. Continents shift, revealing chambers that were once buried under kilometers of rock. Volcanoes erupt, clearing away soil to expose artificial structures beneath. Meteor strikes, crater the surface, breaching outer chambers and creating obvious entry points into the tomb complex. Erosion wears away cliff faces, exposing the polished walls of Necron architecture to anyone passing by. The Necrons planned for many contingencies, but they could not plan for every possible geological event across millions of years of planetary evolution. There is also the uncomfortable possibility, never confirmed but whispered about by Eldar seers, that the Orks are somehow drawn to tomb worlds by instinct. The Orks were created by the Old Ones, specifically to fight the Necrons, after all. Might there be some remnant of that ancient purpose buried deep in their genetic code? Some unconscious recognition that leads them to seek out their ancient enemies? If so, it would explain the frequency with which Ork movements seem to coincide with awakening tomb worlds, as if the greenskins can somehow sense when the ancient warriors are beginning to stir and are drawn to that activity like scavengers to a fresh kill. Whatever the exact mechanism, the result is the same. Orks arrive at tomb worlds with disturbing regularity, and when they do, they invariably begin doing exactly what Orks do best. They dig, they loot, they fight anything that tries to stop them, and they spread their spores throughout the area, ensuring that even if they are eventually defeated, Orks will plague this location for generations to come. For a Necron lord planning to reclaim the galaxy, waking to find Orks have turned his tomb into a war zone represents the worst possible scenario, short of total destruction. At least destruction would be clean, final, understandable. The Ork infestation is messy, persistent, and fundamentally insulting in ways that transcend mere military inconvenience. The invasion. When Orks move in, The process of orc occupation in a Necron tomb follows predictable patterns, though the specific details vary based on the size of the orc force, the sophistication of the tomb's outer defenses, and whether the tomb is dormant or in the early stages of awakening when the greenskins arrive. What remains consistent is the fundamental orc approach. See something interesting, hit it until it breaks or opens, loot everything inside, fight anything that objects. Repeat until nothing is left to loot or all the orcs are dead. The initial breach of a tomb's outer defenses is often easier than the Necrons intended, though not for reasons of poor design. Necron security systems were calibrated for a galaxy that no longer exists, designed to counter threats that have long since gone extinct or evolved beyond recognition. The Eldar who might have hunted dormant Necrons are a shadow of their former empire, scattered and diminished. The old ones who created the Orks to fight the Necrons are gone entirely, leaving no one to oppose the Necrons' awakening with the strategic sophistication the defenses were designed to counter. Orks represent something the Necron tomb designers never seriously considered. Enemies too stupid to be deterred, and too numerous to be stopped by automated defenses calibrated for smaller incursions. When an orc mob hits a tomb entrance, they do not try to bypass security systems or find weaknesses in the defense grid. They simply mass at the entrance and start attacking, throwing bodies at the problem until something gives way. Automated defenses designed to repel scout parties or small strike forces are quickly overwhelmed by the sheer volume of orcs willing to charge into certain death if it means their fellow boys behind them might get through. The first orcs into a tomb complex are usually Gretchen, smaller cousins to the orcs proper, used as cannon fodder and sent ahead to trigger traps and scout unknown areas. These diminutive greenskins scurry through corridors, squeaking in terror but too frightened of their orc masters to retreat, their sharp eyes spotting valuable items, even as they navigate deadly environs. Many Gretchen die in these initial explorations, vaporized by defense lasers or crushed by mechanical traps, but enough survive to report back about what they have found. The Gretchen word for loot is also their word for treasure, food, and anything not nailed down, giving some indication of how they evaluate their discoveries. Behind the Gretchen come the boys themselves, the rank-and-file orcs who make up the bulk of any mob. They are less cautious than the Gretchen but more resilient, able to survive hits that would kill smaller greenskins and possessing enough cunning to avoid the most obvious traps, even if they cannot recognize more sophisticated hazards. The boys spread through the outer chambers of the tomb like a green tide, bashing open doors, prying artifacts from walls, and claiming the largest rooms as gathering spaces where they can light fires, cook food, and fight among themselves when bored with exploration. What happens next depends largely on what the boys find in these outer chambers. If the tomb's outer sections contain storage areas or maintenance passages, the orcs will discover relatively little of immediate interest, but will settle in anyway, using the chambers as bases from which to explore deeper. If the outer sections contain weapon caches or vehicle storage, the orcs hit the jackpot from their perspective. Ancient Necron artifacts, still functional after millions of years, are ripe for looting. The fact that the orcs have no idea what these items do or how to use them properly is irrelevant. Shiny ancient technology is the best kind of loot, and the mech boys will certainly want to see it. It is at this stage that the orc occupation truly begins in earnest. The mob that breached the tomb sends word to the rest of the force. They have found a great place to loot, full of interesting stuff, and with plenty of room for the boys to spread out. More orcs arrive, bringing their vehicles, their weapons, their pet squigs, and all the accumulated detritus of orc civilization. The outer chambers of the tomb transform from sterile, empty spaces, maintained for millions of years, into chaotic orc settlements, complete with cookfires, ammunition dumps, crude fortifications, and lots of fighting. The transformation of Necron architecture into orc living space is jarring in its thoroughness. Walls that once displayed the heraldry of ancient dynasties are covered in orc graffiti, crude representations of grinning faces and crossed axes and other symbols meaningful only to greenskins. Floors designed to facilitate the movement of warrior phalanxes are covered in debris, spent shell casings, and the remains of whatever the orcs have been eating. Ceilings that incorporated sophisticated lighting systems are now festooned with ramshackle platforms where Gretchen have set up homes, accessible only by rope ladders and filled with hoarded treasures stolen from other orcs. The orcs' complete disregard for the sanctity of Necron architecture leads them to make modifications that would horrify any being with respect for ancient structures. They knock down walls to create larger spaces for their vehicles. They punch holes through ceilings to provide ventilation for their forges. They route coolant lines from deeper in the tomb to supply water for their crude industrial processes. Never mind that these lines were part of critical life support systems for the tomb's sleeping inhabitants. They install generators that leak toxic fumes, build workshops that shower everything in metal shavings and sparks, create living quarters that are equal parts barracks and garbage dump. As the orc occupation expands, mobs begin exploring deeper into the tomb complex, pushing past the maintenance areas and supply chambers into the more significant sections. Here they encounter the first signs that this is not merely an abandoned alien facility, but something far more dangerous. Doors that resist all attempts to force them open, sealed by mechanisms the orcs cannot defeat with brute strength. Energy fields that spark and crackle when touched, clearly active and protecting something important. Rooms where the temperature drops precipitously, where frost forms on metal surfaces despite the orcs' fires blazing nearby. These warning signs excite rather than deter the orcs. Obviously, the really good loot is behind those sealed doors. Obviously, those energy fields protect the most valuable treasures. Obviously, the cold rooms contain something worth going to such effort to preserve. The orcs redouble their efforts, bringing up their mechs to study the mechanisms, deploying more boys to search for alternative routes, attempting to blast through walls and floors if direct approaches prove too difficult. The mech boys, orc specialists in technology and engineering, find the Necron tomb absolutely fascinating. Here is technology more advanced than anything they have encountered. Mechanisms that still function perfectly after millions of years. Power sources that run without fuel. Materials that self-repair when damaged. To a mech, this is not just loot, it is inspiration. Endless examples of things that could potentially be incorporated into orc technology. The fact that they understand perhaps 1% of what they are looking at does not diminish their enthusiasm. They know a good design when they see one, even if they cannot articulate why it works or how to replicate it. These mechs begin a process that could generously be called reverse engineering, but which more accurately resembles vandalism with educational benefits. They pull apart Necron devices to see how they work, taking careful mental notes about which bits spark when disconnected and which bits seem to be the important ones. They attempt to incorporate Necron components into their own creations, bolting ancient alien circuits onto ramshackle orc machinery with predictably unstable results. They compete with each other to see who can loot the best devices or create the most impressive hybrid technology, leading to workshops filled with half-disassembled alien artifacts and orc contraptions that occasionally explode spectacularly. As weeks pass and the orc occupation becomes more entrenched, their modifications to the tomb grow more extensive and more destructive. They establish workshops in chambers that once served as sanctuaries for Necron nobility. They store ammunition in rooms that housed ancient treasures. They use priceless Necron-tier artifacts as target practice, fuel for fires, or raw materials for their crude crafts. They desecrate halls of remembrance where the honored dead once lay in state, converting them into fighting pits where orcs battle for dominance and entertainment. The orc presence also begins fundamentally altering the tomb's environment in ways that will have long-lasting consequences. Their spores, released constantly throughout their lives, and especially upon death, spread through the ventilation systems and embed themselves in every crack and crevice. These spores will remain viable for decades or centuries, waiting for conditions favorable enough to germinate. Even if every orc is eventually killed and removed from the tomb, the spores ensure that new orcs will eventually emerge, smaller and more primitive at first, but inevitably growing into a new infestation given enough time. The orcs' impact on the tomb's life support and environmental systems is equally problematic. Their fires consume oxygen and produce smoke that clogs filtration systems designed to maintain sterile conditions. Their industrial activities release chemicals and particulates that corrupt the tomb's internal atmosphere. Their modifications to coolant lines and power conduits create inefficiencies and failure points throughout the complex. Systems that operated flawlessly for millions of years begin to experience malfunctions, cascading failures that spread through interconnected networks like a disease. Perhaps most damaging is what the Orks do to the tomb's stasis crypts when they discover them. These chambers, housing dormant Necron warriors in temporal suspension, are clearly important, clearly containing something valuable. The Orks cannot open the stasis fields through any conventional means, but they try anyway, bashing at the crypts with hammers, shooting at them with guns, attempting to pry them open with crude tools. Most stasis fields resist these assaults, but occasionally one fails, either from accumulated damage or simple bad luck. When a stasis field fails prematurely, the results are unpredictable. Sometimes, the Necron within simply ceases to function, their consciousness irretrievably lost as the temporal stasis collapses improperly. Sometimes, the warrior within begins an emergency awakening sequence, emerging disoriented and damaged, but functional enough to attack the nearest targets, which invariably happen to be Orks. Sometimes, the stasis field fails catastrophically, releasing a burst of temporal energy that ages everything nearby to dust, or causes localized time distortions that turn the surrounding area into a hazard zone where past, present, and future exist simultaneously. These premature awakenings are the first sign that the tomb's automatic defense systems are beginning to respond to the Ork infestation. Individual warriors awakening from damaged stasis crypts are just the beginning. Somewhere deeper in the tomb complex, in chambers the Orks have not yet reached, automated protocols are detecting the intrusion, assessing the threat level, and beginning the process of activating defensive measures. The response is not immediate, not all at once. The tomb awakens in stages, systems coming online according to carefully programmed priorities, building toward a response that will eventually prove overwhelming. But for now, in these early stages of the tomb's awakening, the Orks remain blissfully unaware of the catastrophe they have set in motion. They have found a grand place to loot, full of interesting technology and providing excellent shelter from the elements. They have established workshops, living quarters, fighting pits, and all the other amenities that Ork civilization requires. Some mobs have pushed deep into the complex, mapping new areas and claiming the best territories for themselves. Others have settled into the outer chambers, content to fight among themselves and loot what has already been discovered. The larger Orks dominate the best locations. The smaller ones make do with less desirable spots, and everyone seems quite happy with the arrangement. The war boss leading the occupation sits in what was once a sacred hall of remembrance, now converted into his throne room, surrounded by looted treasures and subordinate nobs. He receives reports from his mechs about interesting finds, settles disputes between rival mobs, and occasionally ventures deeper into the tomb to see what his boys have discovered. As far as he is concerned, this is an excellent location, better than most human worlds they have raided, and with none of the annoying resistance. A few automated defense systems have activated, sure, but nothing the boys cannot handle. A few odd mechanical constructs have attacked the outer perimeter, but the boys destroyed them easily enough. Everything is going great. He has no way of knowing that deep below, in the tomb's central command chamber, monitoring systems that have lain dormant for 60 million years have finally detected the intrusion. Diagnostic subroutines are running, assessing the extent of the damage, cataloging which systems remain functional and which need repair. Priority matrices are determining the appropriate response, weighing the threat posed by the invaders against available resources and the current state of the tomb's awakening process. Activation sequences are being prepared, ready to bring warrior cohorts out of stasis in carefully orchestrated waves. The war boss, sitting on his looted throne and gnawing on roasted squig, has no idea that he and his entire mob are about to face an enemy that has been preparing for war since before his ancestors' were even a gleam in an evolutionary algorithm's eye. An enemy that does not tire, does not know fear, does not retreat from overwhelming odds, and considers death a temporary inconvenience at best. An enemy with technology so advanced that it appears magical, with weapons that can unmake matter at the atomic level, and with a patience measured in geological eons. The Orks are about to learn that some loot comes with consequences. First stirrings. Automated defenses awaken. The tomb's response to the Ork invasion does not begin with fanfare or dramatic revelation. There are no alarms blaring, no warning lights flashing, no automated voice announcing intruders. The response is silent, methodical, and utterly ruthless. Systems that have remained inactive for millions of years begin their startup procedures, running diagnostic checks and confirming functionality before initiating defensive protocols. The tomb is awakening to war, and it does so with the same terrible efficiency that once conquered the galaxy. The first active responses come from the simplest and most numerous defenders, the canoptek scarabs. These beetle-like constructs serve multiple functions within a tomb complex, acting as maintenance units, repair systems, and when necessary, weapons. Each scarab is barely larger than a human fist, composed of the same living metal that makes up all Necron constructs, but configured for utility rather than direct combat. Their primary purpose is maintaining the tomb's integrity, repairing damage to walls and systems, recycling materials, and keeping everything in pristine condition during the long sleep. But they also serve as the immune system of the tomb, responding to infections and contamination with swift and decisive action. The scarabs detect the Ork presence through multiple sensory inputs that no organic being possesses. They register the chemical contamination from Ork campfires and crude machinery, the biological signals from living tissues, the disruption to the tomb's carefully maintained environmental balance. Individual scarabs are programmed to respond to minor maintenance issues on their own initiative, but they are also networked into larger control systems that can coordinate their actions across the entire tomb complex. As more scarabs detect anomalies, the network recognizes a pattern. This is not minor damage from geological forces or equipment malfunction. This is a deliberate intrusion by biological life forms. The scarab swarms begin with the outer areas where Ork contamination is most extensive. They emerge from access tunnels and maintenance shafts that the Orks never noticed, places where the tomb's original architects designed routes for automated systems to navigate without disturbing the main chambers. At first, the scarabs appear in small numbers, individual units or pairs investigating areas, and then withdrawing to report. The Orks, if they notice the scarabs at all, mistake them for local wildlife, or pay them no mind. They are just bugs, barely worth kicking aside when they scurry past, certainly not worth wasting ammunition on. This dismissive attitude lasts precisely until the scarabs attack en masse. A Gretchen scavenging in a side passage becomes the first casualty, suddenly covered in dozens of metallic beetles that begin disassembling him at the molecular level, reducing flesh and bone to constituent atoms with horrifying efficiency. The Gretchen's screams alert nearby Orks, who rush to investigate only to find more scarabs pouring from vents and cracks, forming clouds of glittering metal that swarm over anything biological they encounter. The scarab's method of attack is as fascinating as it is horrifying. They do not bite or sting in any conventional sense. Instead, they project short-range molecular disintegration fields, the same technology they use to break down damaged materials for recycling. These fields strip matter layer by layer, reducing complex organic molecules to simpler compounds, and then to individual atoms, which the scarabs can then convert into useful materials for tomb repairs. Against living tissue, the effect is devastating and agonizing, as victims watch their own flesh literally dissolve while scarabs crawl over them. The Orks respond to this new threat with their characteristic directness. They start shooting. Bolters roar, sluggers bark, choppers swing at the swarming constructs. Individual scarabs are destroyed easily enough, their delicate mechanisms no match for direct hits from Ork weaponry. But for every scarab destroyed, 3 more emerge to take its place, and the swarms continue growing as more units respond to the alert broadcast by their networked consciousness. The Orks find themselves fighting a foe that numbers in the thousands, perhaps tens of thousands. with more arriving constantly from deeper in the tomb. This is the Orks' first real indication that they may have miscalculated. Yes, they have dealt with automated defenses before, but those were typically fixed installations that could be destroyed or bypassed. These scarabs are different. They come from everywhere, squeeze through impossibly small gaps, and seem to have an inexhaustible supply of replacements. More concerning to the older, more experienced Orks is the intelligence behind the attacks. The scarabs are not simply swarming mindlessly. They are targeting specific locations, focusing on areas where Ork modifications to the tomb are most extensive, as if deliberately undoing the greenskins' work. Behind the scarab swarms come larger constructs, the Canoptek spiders. If scarabs are the immune system, spiders are the surgeons. Mobile factories capable of producing more scarabs and directing their activities with more sophisticated strategic thinking. Each spider is roughly the size of a small vehicle, a quadrupedal construct mounting a fearsome array of cutting tools, particle beamers, and fabricator mandibles that can disassemble and reassemble matter with frightening precision. The spiders move with an eerie grace that belies their bulk. 8 legs, carrying them across floors, up walls, and across ceilings with equal ease. They ignore gravity, using built-in gravitic engines to maintain any orientation they choose. When Orks first encounter these larger constructs, the greenskins typically respond with enthusiasm. Finally, something their size to fight, something that looks tough and important, and probably worth good loot if they can take it down. These engagements go poorly for the Orks. The spiders are not frontline combat units, but they were designed to operate in hostile environments and defend themselves effectively. Their particle beamers fire focused streams of energy that burn through Ork flesh and crude armor with ease. Their cutting tools, intended for precision disassembly of tomb components, prove equally effective at dismembering Orks who get too close. Most terrifying is their ability to produce scarabs in combat, fabricating new units from raw materials and deploying them immediately into battle, turning any extended engagement into a losing proposition as the Orks face ever-growing swarms. But it is what the spiders do when not actively fighting that truly demonstrates the tomb's methodical response to the invasion. They move through areas cleared by scarab swarms and begin repairing the damage the Orks have inflicted. Walls are restored, systems are brought back online, modifications are undone. The progress is slow but inexorable, and the Orks begin to realize with growing unease that they cannot hold territory against this enemy. They can destroy individual constructs, can drive off attacks, and even clear entire chambers of the mechanical invaders. But every area they abandon is quickly reclaimed and restored to pristine condition. Some Orks find this incredibly frustrating. They can win individual fights, but cannot seem to make progress. Other Orks think it is great fun. The best fights are the ones where the enemy keeps coming back for more. Both groups agree on one thing: they need more boys. Word spreads through the mob that the tomb is fighting back properly now, and Orks being Orks, this news brings reinforcements. Those who had been content to loot the outer chambers now push deeper, eager for a proper scrap. Those who had been fighting among themselves declare truces, at least temporarily, to join forces against this new enemy. The escalation follows predictable patterns. More Orks means more fighting, which triggers more of the tomb's defensive responses. Weapons systems that have lain dormant for eons begin their activation sequences. Defense lasers emerge from concealed positions in walls and ceilings, tracking targets with inhuman precision and firing beams that burn through flesh and crude armor. Tesla conductors activate, releasing arcs of living lightning that leap from one Ork to another, cooking entire groups simultaneously. Particle shredders vaporize grenades in mid-flight and reduce Ork vehicles to clouds of atomized metal. These fixed defenses force the Orks to modify their tactics, though modification for Orks typically means bring more boys and bigger guns. They learn quickly that moving through certain corridors is suicide, so they redirect their explorations through other routes. Unknowingly, following paths the tomb's tactical programming intended them to follow, channeling the invaders into kill zones and defensive strongpoints, while keeping them away from critical systems. Some Ork mechs become fascinated by the tomb's defensive systems and attempt to loot them for their own use. This rarely works as intended. Necron weapons require sophisticated power sources and control systems that Ork technology cannot replicate or even properly interface with. Still, the attempts produce interesting results. A looted defense laser, ripped from its mounting and grafted onto an Ork vehicle, might function for a few shots before catastrophically failing. A captured Tesla conductor, incorporated into a mech's armor, might discharge randomly and fry its wearer along with nearby enemies. The mechs consider these outcomes educational rather than discouraging. As the tomb's automated defenses continue their work, patterns become apparent to those Orks clever enough to recognize them. The attacks are not random but coordinated, clearly controlled by some central intelligence. The defenses adapt to Ork tactics, changing their patterns when the greenskins figure out how to counter them. Most telling, the defensive response is escalating systematically, bringing more sophisticated and dangerous systems online as the earlier defenses prove insufficient. The smartest Orks, particularly the more experienced Nobs and the warboss himself, begin to suspect they may have made a terrible mistake. This is not just an abandoned alien facility with some leftover defense systems. This is something much more dangerous, something that is waking up and starting to fight back properly. The question is whether they should cut their losses and abandon the tomb before things get worse. The problem with this plan is that most Orks would never agree to it. Running away from a good fight is not the Ork way, and the warboss would lose all credibility if he suggested retreat. Besides, look at all the good loot they have accumulated. Surely they can handle whatever else this place throws at them. This confidence proves spectacularly misplaced when the first true Necron warriors begin to emerge. The Awakening, warriors rise. Deep in the tomb's stasis crypts, rows upon rows of sarcophagi have remained sealed for millions of years, their occupants suspended in temporal stasis so complete that no time passes for them at all. These are the Necron warriors, the backbone of any tomb's military might. Rank-and-file soldiers who once conquered worlds and now await the call to do so again. Each warrior is a marvel of technology wrapped in tragedy, an uploaded consciousness, bound into a body of living metal, stripped of most of their memories and personality to serve as efficient soldiers in the endless wars their masters decree. The awakening of these warriors follows protocols established before the Great Sleep, carefully programmed sequences designed to minimize confusion and maximize combat effectiveness. As each warrior's stasis field deactivates, their consciousness returns to function, experiencing the transition as instantaneous. One moment they were sealing themselves into stasis, the next they are emerging, the intervening 60 million years simply not existing from their perspective. This discontinuity is disorienting but not debilitating, as the warrior's programming includes behavioral protocols that override confusion and direct them toward immediate tasks. The first warriors to awaken are those in crypts closest to the tomb's command center and most easily accessed by the awakening protocols. They emerge in organized ranks, maintaining formation even as consciousness returns, their programming enforcing discipline that transcends mere conscious thought. Systems check routines run automatically, confirming functionality of limbs, weapons, sensory inputs. Basic tactical subroutines activate, providing situational awareness and threat assessment capabilities. Command protocols establish communication links with other awakened warriors and with the tomb's central intelligence, creating a networked army capable of coordinating actions with inhuman precision. The warrior's first indication that something is wrong comes from those diagnostic reports. The tomb's internal atmosphere is contaminated with biological signatures and combustion byproducts. Numerous systems show damage or degradation inconsistent with normal aging. Defensive protocols are active, indicating ongoing combat operations. Most concerning, the chronostat readings indicate they should not be awake yet, that the Great Sleep was not scheduled to end for several thousand years more. Something has forced an emergency awakening, and the warrior's tactical programming immediately categorizes this as a priority threat requiring immediate response. The initial warrior cohorts number in the hundreds, a fraction of the tomb's total military strength, but more than sufficient to address most expected threats. They emerge from their stasis crypts fully armed, each warrior carrying a Gauss flare, the standard weapon of Necron infantry, and a technological marvel that reduces matter to its constituent atoms through targeted molecular dissolution. The warriors move in perfect synchronization. Decades of training and millions of years of enforced behavioral modification, creating a cohesion that no living army can match. They do not speak, do not need to speak, as tactical data flows between them instantaneously through their network connections. The warriors' first objective is to secure the areas immediately surrounding the stasis crypts, establishing defensive perimeter and confirming that awakening can continue safely. They spread through nearby corridors, their optical sensors sweeping chambers for threats, their Gauss flares held ready but not yet discharged. Everything proceeds according to protocol until they reach the boundary between the tomb's inner sanctums and the outer areas where the Orks have established their presence. Here, the warriors encounter evidence of the intrusion for the first time, and the sight stops them in their tracks. The corridors are devastated. Walls scored by crude weapons fire, floors covered in debris and organic waste, ceilings blackened by smoke from uncountable fires. Necron artifacts, priceless relics of a civilization that predates most species' existence, are scattered carelessly or incorporated into crude barricades. The architectural harmony that once defined these spaces has been destroyed, replaced by chaotic disorder that offends the warriors' programmed aesthetic sensibilities at a fundamental level. Worse is the smell. If their sensory apparatus can be said to detect smell, the reek of biological contamination, of crude fuel combustion, of waste and decay, permeates areas that were maintained in sterile perfection for millions of years. But it is not the physical damage that truly shocks the warriors. It is the presence of Orks. The warriors' tactical databases include extensive information about potential threats, a catalogue of species and enemies the Necrons might face upon awakening. The Orks are in that database, recognized as a persistent nuisance created by the Old Ones during the War in Heaven. But the database entry categorizes them as primarily a threat to less advanced species. The Necrons fought and defeated the Old Ones, the most powerful civilization the galaxy had ever known. Surely the Old Ones' crude biological weapons pose no significant threat to the inheritors of the Necrontier legacy. This assumption lasts exactly as long as it takes for the first warrior cohort to encounter an Ork mob head-on. The Greenskins, alerted by the distinctive sound of metallic footsteps advancing in perfect unison, respond with their usual subtlety. They charge forward, screaming battle cries and firing weapons wildly in the warriors' general direction. The Necron formation halts, targeting protocols engaging, threat assessment subroutines calculating optimal firing solutions. The warriors raise their Gauss flares in perfect unison, acquire their targets, and fire. The first volley is devastating. Gauss flare beams, coherent streams of molecular disruption energy, tear through Ork bodies with horrifying efficiency. The Orks have no defense against weapons that bypass armor and flesh entirely. Attacking at the atomic level, Greenskins, caught in the crossfire, simply disintegrate, their bodies reduced to clouds of free-floating atoms that disperse into the surrounding atmosphere. It is the most complete form of death the galaxy offers, annihilation so thorough that not even genetic material remains to indicate the target ever existed. A dozen Orks die in that first volley, and for a moment it seems the warriors will sweep through the tomb with ease, clearing out the infestation with clinical efficiency. Then the surviving Orks crash into their lines, and the Necrons learn the first of many hard lessons about fighting Greenskins. Numbers matter, durability matters, and most importantly, Orks do not break when faced with overwhelming odds. The Orks smash into the warrior formation with the force of a tidal wave, chopas rising and falling, sluggers barking at point-blank range. Individual warriors are battered to the ground, their elegant formation disrupted by the sheer physical mass of Ork bodies pressing forward. The Necrons are stronger than humans, tougher than most organic beings, but they are not built for sustained melee combat the way Orks are. When a chopper connects with a warrior's torso, the blade carves through living metal with disturbing ease. When an Ork power claw closes around a warrior's head, the skull crumples like foil. But the warriors do not panic, do not rout, do not even really react beyond updating their tactical assessments. Damaged warriors continue fighting until their systems fail entirely, their programming overriding any sense of self-preservation. Warriors with severed limbs use remaining weapons. Warriors bisected by chopper blows drag themselves forward to engage enemies at close range. Warriors reduced to barely functioning torsos still attempt to target threats with their optical sensors. They are relentless in a way no living being can match, because death for a Necron warrior is not the end but merely an inconvenience. The Orks, for their part, are thrilled. Finally, proper opponents. These metal skeletons are tough, they hit hard, and they keep getting back up, even after being knocked down. This is going to be a great fight. The boys press forward with renewed enthusiasm, treating the battle less like a desperate struggle for survival and more like the galaxy's best entertainment. And then the Necron's most iconic ability manifests for the first time. Reanimation protocols activate. Warriors who fell to Ork weapons, their bodies damaged beyond immediate functionality, begin to glow with an eerie emerald light. Severed limbs crawl across the floor toward their owners' bodies. Metal, flowing like liquid to reattach. Crushed torsos reshape themselves. Living metal, remembering its original configuration and restoring it atom by atom. Shattered skulls reform, optical sensors flickering back to life, weapons raising once more to target the enemies who thought they had achieved victory. The Orks' response to this development is predictable. They are not afraid. They are excited. The metal skeletons are even tougher than they thought. You have to really smash them good to keep them down. This just means the fighting will last longer, which is great news from the Ork perspective. The battle continues, with renewed intensity. Orks and warriors locked in brutal melee throughout the contested corridors, neither side willing or able to retreat. More warrior cohorts arrive as additional stasis crypts complete their awakening sequences, reinforcing the initial forces and pushing deeper into Ork-held territory. The Necrons' advantages become more apparent as their numbers grow. Their perfect coordination, their tireless endurance, their ability to bring downed warriors back into the fight. The Orks' initial numerical superiority begins to erode as casualties mount faster than their reinforcements can arrive from the outer chambers. But erosion is not defeat, and the Orks adapt with remarkable speed for creatures supposedly lacking sophistication. They learn that the metal skeletons go down easier if you hit them hard enough fast enough that their self-repair systems cannot keep up. They learn that concentrated fire from multiple sluggers can overwhelm a warrior before it can return fire. They learn that grabbing a warrior and literally tearing it apart piece by piece prevents reanimation better than a single killing blow. Most importantly, they learn to focus fire on warriors that are trying to reanimate, preventing the self-repair process from completing. The battle spreads throughout the tomb complex as both sides commit more forces. Orks from the outer settlement rush to join the fighting, while more warrior cohorts emerge from awakened crypts to reinforce their fellows. Corridors that once echoed with silence now reverberate with the thunder of weapons fire and the clash of metal on metal. Chambers that housed artifacts of incomparable value become battlefields where ancient treasures are trampled underfoot or destroyed by stray shots. The Necron warriors' initial shock at finding their tomb so thoroughly defiled gives way to a cold, mechanical fury. These biological primitives have desecrated sacred ground, stolen artifacts, destroyed priceless relics of Necrontier civilization. The offense goes beyond mere military threat into something approaching sacrilege, and while the warriors lack the capacity for true emotion, their behavioral protocols approximate outrage at the violation of their tomb. This drives them forward with increased aggression, prioritizing the complete elimination of the greenskin infestation above all other concerns, including their own continued functionality. From the Orks' perspective, things are going great. Yes, lots of boys are dying, but lots of enemies are being killed too, and the enemies keep getting back up for more punishment, which makes the fighting last even longer. The loot situation is excellent. They are collecting damaged Necron warriors and weapons at an impressive rate, and the mechs are already planning all the interesting things they can do with the parts. The fighting has spread throughout the structure, meaning there is action everywhere, and no orc needs to feel left out. The war boss could not have planned a better campaign if he had tried. The war boss himself, leading his best nobs in the thickest fighting, recognizes that the situation has changed, but not necessarily in a bad way. The tomb has come alive, yes, but that just means better enemies to fight. His boys are handling themselves well, adapting to the metal skeleton's tricks and learning how to counter them. More importantly, the fighting is forcing the orcs to work together, putting aside their constant infighting to face a common enemy. A proper threat like this is good for mob cohesion. What the war boss does not yet realize, what none of the orcs can fully comprehend, is that the tomb has barely begun to fight back. The warrior cohorts currently engaged represent perhaps 10% of the tomb's total military strength. Deeper in the complex, in chambers, the orcs have not reached, and in some cases do not even know exist. More sophisticated defenses are awakening. Immortals, elite infantry with weapons more powerful than the warriors' Gauss flayers, destroyers, floating platforms of concentrated firepower, Lichguard, the personal bodyguards of Necron nobility, armed and armored beyond anything the orcs have yet encountered. And deeper still, in the tomb's most sacred chambers, the Overlord himself begins to stir from his 60-million-year slumber, his consciousness returning to full function as systems feed him status reports on the tomb's condition and the nature of the threat that has triggered this emergency awakening. When he learns what has happened to his tomb during his sleep, when he sees the violation that has been inflicted upon his domain, his response will make the current battle seem like a preliminary skirmish. The orcs, glorying in their fighting and pleased with their looting, remain blissfully ignorant of the storm that is about to descend upon them. Full response. When the nobles emerge in the deepest chambers of the tomb, where the most powerful Necrons of the dynasty rest in ornate sarcophagi that dwarf those of common warriors, awakening protocols reach their final stage. The Overlord's stasis field begins to deactivate, carefully managed dissolution of temporal suspension that brings consciousness back online in stages, allowing systems to stabilize and preventing the disorientation that can result from too sudden awakening. For a being of the Overlord's power and sophistication, every aspect of the awakening process is crucial, as the mental frameworks that hold his personality intact are vastly more complex than those of basic warriors. The Overlord's return to consciousness follows a progression that mirrors his last moments before entering stasis millions of years ago. First comes basic awareness, the simple recognition that he exists. Then sensory input begins. Optical sensors initializing and providing visual data, auditory receptors coming online and feeding him sound, tactical networks connecting him to the tomb's information systems. Memory engrams activate, providing context and identity, reminding him who he is, what his position entails, what his responsibilities demand. Finally, higher cognitive functions engage, allowing strategic thinking, tactical analysis, and the exercise of will that makes him lord of this dynasty. The process takes mere seconds from an external perspective but feels like hours to the Overlord, as his consciousness processes millions of data points while simultaneously managing the startup of systems that control his physical form. When his optical sensors finally focus properly and his body responds to his commands, he sits up in his sarcophagus and begins reviewing the situation reports that have accumulated during his awakening. What he reads is enough to make even a being without true emotions experience something approaching shock. The tomb has been invaded, not by sophisticated enemies employing advanced stealth technology, not by carefully planned military assault, not by Eldar rangers seeking to destroy the tomb while its inhabitants slumbered. No, the invaders are orcs, green-skinned primitives, barely above beasts, who have somehow not only found the tomb, but breached its outer defenses and established a significant presence within the complex. The outer chambers are thoroughly contaminated with biological presence. The architectural integrity of numerous sections has been compromised, and worst of all, the invasion has been ongoing for an extended period, potentially months or years, before the awakening protocols finally responded. The Overlord's initial reaction, processed through behavioral subroutines that approximate emotion, is disbelief. How did this happen? The tomb was placed on a world specifically chosen for its desolation and lack of strategic value. The outer defenses should have deterred any casual investigation and destroyed any serious assault. The Orks should not even be here, should not have found this place, should certainly not have penetrated this deeply into the complex. Yet the evidence is undeniable. They are here, they have been here for some time, and they have inflicted substantial damage. The second wave of processing brings something closer to fury. These biological primitives have desecrated his tomb, stolen artifacts of immeasurable historical value, destroyed irreplaceable treasures from the Necrontier era, and treated his dynasty's sacred resting place as what? Exactly. The reports are unclear on Ork motivations, because Ork motivations make no sense to Necron logical frameworks. They appear to be here for the purposes of looting and fighting, which explains nothing about why they would choose this location, or how they managed to survive the initial defensive responses. But there is no time for detailed analysis of how this situation came to be. The Overlord's primary responsibility is to his tomb and his dynasty. The immediate priority is eliminating the threat and securing the complex so that full awakening can proceed safely. Longer-term concerns about how to prevent such intrusions in the future and what this event says about the state of the galaxy can wait. First, the Orks must be destroyed. The Overlord rises from his sarcophagus and begins issuing commands through the tomb's communication network. His authority reactivates dormant systems and accelerates awakening protocols that have been proceeding at a conservative pace. More warrior cohorts are brought online, not in careful sequence, but as quickly as stasis systems can safely manage. Immortal squads, held in reserve until now, receive activation orders. The armory systems are commanded to begin weapon distribution to newly awakened forces. Tomb blades launch from their hangar bays to provide aerial reconnaissance. Ghost arcs and other transport constructs power up their engines, ready to move reinforcements to critical sectors. Most critically, the Overlord awakens his court, the Lich Guard, and elite warriors who serve as his personal guard and execute his most important commands. These are not simple warriors with basic programming but sophisticated combat constructs, each retaining far more of their original personality and capability than rank-and-file troops. They awaken quickly, their stasis systems receiving priority power, and immediately respond to their lord's summons. Within minutes of the Overlord's own awakening, his court stands ready, weapons charged and armor gleaming, awaiting their master's commands. The Overlord's first personal action, before even leaving his sanctum, is to access the tomb's historical records and review everything about Orks in the tactical database. If he must fight these creatures, he will understand them as thoroughly as possible. The database entries are extensive, compiled from thousands of engagements during the War in Heaven, and updated periodically as the Necrons encountered Ork populations in the millennia before the Great Sleep. The information is both helpful and deeply concerning. Helpful. Orks are biologically primitive, technologically crude, and tactically unsophisticated. They lack strategic depth, cannot maintain siege operations, and have no capacity for the kind of methodical warfare at which Necrons excel. Their weapons are inferior in every measurable way. Their armor is laughable, and their discipline is non-existent. On paper, they should pose no significant threat to a properly awakened tomb world. Concerning, Orks reproduce rapidly and are nearly impossible to eliminate completely due to their spore-based biology. They thrive on combat and become more dangerous the longer a fight continues. Their crude technology works through poorly understood psychic principles that defy logical analysis. Most troubling, historical records indicate that Orks become dramatically more effective in large numbers, exhibiting a psychic field effect that enhances their capabilities in ways that scale exponentially with population size. The longer this infestation has existed, the stronger the Orks may have become. The tactical assessment is clear. The Ork infestation must be eliminated completely and quickly, before they can grow stronger or spread further. Half measures will not suffice. The Overlord must commit overwhelming force to eradicate every last Ork, and then ensure thorough decontamination to eliminate the spores they have undoubtedly spread throughout the tomb. This will be resource-intensive and will delay the tomb's full awakening, but it is necessary. A dynasty cannot begin its campaign of reclamation with its own tomb compromised by greenskin infestation. The Overlord makes his way through the tomb toward the areas of heaviest fighting, his Lich Guard forming a protective phalanx around him, clearance protocols causing sealed doors to open at his approach. The path takes him through sections of the tomb he has not seen since before the Great Sleep, and the damage visible even in these inner chambers speaks to how thorough the Ork invasion has been. Walls show signs of crude repair attempts where Orks apparently tried to patch breaches they themselves created. Chambers that should contain specific artifacts are empty, their contents presumably looted. The floor of one corridor is covered in a thin layer of what analysis confirms is Ork fungal spores, lying dormant, but still viable. The Overlord's route eventually brings him to the boundary between the tomb's inner sanctums and the contested outer areas where his warriors have been fighting the Ork mobs for hours. The contrast is stark. Behind him, corridors maintain their original perfection, barely touched by the intrusion. Ahead, chaos reigns. Damaged walls, debris everywhere, the sound of weapons fire echoing from multiple directions, the acrid smell of combat contaminating the atmosphere. This is what his tomb has become during his sleep, and the sight reinforces his determination to cleanse it completely. He strides forward into the battle zone, and his presence immediately affects the conflict. Necron warriors, operating on behavioral protocols that recognize the supreme authority of their lord, fight with increased efficiency. Their movements become more coordinated, their targeting improves, their reanimation protocols function more effectively. It is not that the Overlord is actively commanding each warrior, though he could, if necessary. Rather, his presence itself enhances their functionality through the command protocols that link all Necrons in a hierarchical network. With a lord on the battlefield, even basic warriors fight better. The Orks, meanwhile, notice the new arrival with interest. That one's clearly the boss, bigger, fancier, surrounded by even tougher-looking metal skeletons. That's the one you need to kill if you want to win the fight proper. Word spreads quickly through the Ork mob, and suddenly, every Ork in the sector wants to be the one who takes down the enemy boss. Glory awaits whoever manages that feat. And glory is what Orks live for, almost as much as fighting itself. The Overlord's personal combat capabilities far exceed those of basic warriors. His Staff of Light, a weapon that combines elegant craftsmanship with devastating destructive power, can project energy that unmakes matter or sweep through multiple enemies with molecular disintegration fields. His War Scythe alternative, which some Overlords prefer, can cleave through armor and flesh with contemptuous ease. His armor incorporates shield systems that can deflect all but the most powerful attacks. His centuries of military experience, the accumulated tactical knowledge of one who led armies when most of the galaxy's current species were still primitive microbes, guides his every action. When the first Ork mob charges toward the Overlord's position, eager to claim the glory of killing the enemy boss, they discover too late what it means to face Necron nobility in combat. The Overlord does not retreat, does not call for support, does not show any concern whatsoever about the mass of greenskin warriors bearing down on him. He simply raises his Staff of Light and fires. The beam that erupts from the weapon's head is wider than those produced by warrior Gauss flayers, brighter, more focused. It cuts through the charging Orks like a blade through water, reducing them to free-floating atoms so quickly that some of them take several more steps before their bodies finish dissolving. The Lich Guard protect their lord's flanks, their hyperphase swords and dispersion shields turning aside attacks that might threaten him. When Orks manage to close to melee range, the Lich Guard demonstrate why they are considered the elite of Necron infantry. Their blades phase through matter at the quantum level, bypassing armor and flesh to strike directly at underlying structure. Their shields, when activated, generate fields that scatter incoming projectiles across multiple dimensions, rendering conventional weapons useless against them. The battle that follows is one-sided in a way that previous engagements have not been. The Overlord's personal intervention and the deployment of elite forces shift the balance decisively in the Necrons' favor. Orc mobs that were holding their ground or even pushing forward suddenly find themselves on the defensive, forced back by the weight of coordinated assault that leverages every advantage the Necrons possess. Reanimation protocols function at peak efficiency under the Overlord's command protocols, bringing warriors back faster and more completely than before. Weapon fire becomes more accurate, targeting priority algorithms optimized by the Overlord's strategic programming. But the Orks are not defeated. Not yet. They adapt, they improvise, they bring forward their own elite units to counter the Necron nobility. Knobs, bigger and tougher than regular boys, wade into combat with power claws and big choppers. Weapons crude by Necron standards, but brutally effective when wielded by opponents strong enough to pulverize living metal through sheer force. Flash gits, Orks who have acquired the biggest guns and the willingness to use them, direct concentrated fire at the Overlord and his guard, not caring about collateral damage to their own side. The Warboss himself joins the fray, recognizing that this is the fight that matters, the confrontation that will determine the overall battle's outcome. He is massive even by Orc standards, scarred by countless battles and covered in crude bionics that supplement his already considerable strength. His power claw could crush a Space Marine's skull. His shooter has killed more enemies than most Orcs will ever see, and his sheer presence rallies his boys, who redouble their efforts at the sight of their leader, engaging the enemy boss directly. The confrontation between Overlord and Warboss, when it finally occurs, is as much symbolic as tactical. Both are commanders, both represent the full might of their respective forces, both understand that victory here will cascade through their armies and potentially determine the battle's final outcome. They approach each other through the chaos of the surrounding melee, lesser combatants instinctively clearing a space for their leaders to fight. The Overlord sees an opponent worthy of grudging acknowledgement, a creature that has survived countless battles, that leads through demonstrated prowess, that possesses enough cunning to have led his mob this deep into the tomb complex. The Warboss sees the ultimate challenge, the enemy boss himself, clearly tough as nails, protected by fancy guards, and probably worth the best loot in the entire tomb if he can be taken down. Both recognize that this will not be a quick fight. The combat that follows showcases the fundamental differences between their species' approaches to warfare. The Overlord fights with precision and calculated efficiency, every movement serving a tactical purpose, every strike designed to exploit weakness or create openings for follow-up attacks. The Warboss fights with brutal enthusiasm, swinging his power claw in wide arcs that could pulp anything they connect with, firing his shooter with more regard for volume of fire than accuracy, trusting his toughness and natural Orc resilience to see him through. The Overlord's staff of light scores hits that would vaporize lesser opponents, but the Warboss's sheer mass and crude bionics absorb damage that should be lethal. The Warboss's power claw catches the Overlord's shoulder, crushing living metal and disrupting internal systems. But self-repair protocols immediately begin fixing the damage, while the Overlord's shield projectors activate to prevent follow-up strikes. They are perfectly matched. Ancient technology and strategic brilliance against biological toughness and overwhelming aggression. Around them, the battle continues to escalate as both sides commit every available resource to supporting their leaders. More warrior cohorts arrive from deeper in the tomb, while more Orcs flood in from the outer chambers. The fighting spreads across multiple levels of the complex, with battles raging in corridors, chambers, and even the maintenance tunnels where Scarabs and Gretchen wage their own miniature wars. The tomb has become a three-dimensional battlefield where any surface might conceal enemies or provide cover, where the distinction between floor and ceiling matters little to combatants who can ignore gravity. It is precisely the sort of meat-grinder conflict that both species excel at, albeit for different reasons. The Necrons fight with remorseless efficiency, their forces coordinating through technological networks that no living army can match. The Orcs fight with joyful enthusiasm, their numbers and toughness allowing them to sustain casualties that would break any other force while still maintaining offensive pressure. Neither side will break, neither side will surrender, neither side will stop until the other is completely destroyed. And somewhere deep in the tomb, in chambers even the Overlord has not yet activated, greater forces stir. Monoliths power up their engines, preparing to deploy. Doomsday Arks charge their weapons, ready to bring orbital bombardment-level firepower to bear in enclosed spaces. Tesseract, vaults, containing things best left undescribed, begin their unsealing sequences. The Overlord has committed significant resources to this battle, but he has not yet deployed the tomb's truly devastating capabilities. Whether those additional resources will be necessary depends on how the current fighting resolves, and that remains uncertain. The battle hangs in balance, two ancient forces locked in struggle, neither able to gain decisive advantage. For the Necrons, this represents a profound failure of expectations. The tomb should have been secured hours ago, the Orks eliminated as the primitive nuisance they appear to be. For the Orks, this is the best fight they have had in recent memory, a proper scrap against tough opponents with unlimited loot, available to anyone who survives. The only certainty is that this conflict will not end through negotiation or retreat. One force will be annihilated, or both will be. Conclusion. The inevitable result. As the conflict between Necrons and Orks reaches its crescendo in the violated corridors of the tomb world, we return to the fundamental absurdity that brought these forces into collision. The Necrons, ancient beyond measure, technologically supreme, and possessing strategic sophistication earned through millions of years of warfare, should be able to eliminate an Ork infestation with relative ease. The Orks, for all their numbers and enthusiasm, are primitives fighting with crude weapons and no real tactical doctrine beyond charge forward and hit things. Yet the battle continues, neither side achieving decisive victory, because both forces possess unique advantages that offset their respective weaknesses. The Necrons cannot be worn down through attrition, their reanimation protocols and repair systems negating much of the damage the Orks inflict. The Orks cannot be completely eliminated without extraordinary effort, their spore-based reproduction ensuring that even total battlefield victory leaves the Necrons facing a cleanup operation that might last decades. The outcome of any specific engagement depends on numerous factors: the tomb's size and military strength, the number of Orks involved in the invasion, how much damage was inflicted before the Necrons fully awakened, whether the Overlord possesses powerful artifacts or can call upon greater constructs like monoliths or Catan shards. In some cases, the Necrons achieve complete victory, systematically clearing their tomb and then spending years sterilizing every chamber to eliminate Ork spores. In other cases, the Orks' numbers prove too great, their assault too sustained, and the tomb falls, its inhabitants destroyed or forced to evacuate to other dynasty strongholds. But regardless of the specific outcome, certain patterns hold true. The Necrons will be forced to expend resources and delay their wider strategic plans to deal with an infestation they never anticipated. The Orks will spread spores throughout the tomb complex, ensuring future problems even if they are completely defeated. The tomb itself will suffer damage that may take centuries to repair properly, and irreplaceable artifacts from the Necrontyr era will be lost to looting or destroyed in the fighting. From a wider perspective, the scenario of Orks invading Necron tombs highlights the fundamental chaos of the galaxy in the 41st millennium. Despite the Necrons' careful planning, despite choosing the most isolated and desolate worlds for their tomb locations, despite installing sophisticated defenses and awakening protocols, they cannot account for the sheer unpredictability of species like the Orks. The Greenskins go where they will, do what they want, and recognize no authority or warning signs that might deter more rational beings. This same pattern plays out across the galaxy as more Necron tomb worlds stir to wakefulness. Some awaken to find themselves on planets now home to thriving human civilizations, their sacred grounds converted into cities or industrial centers. Others discover Eldar maiden worlds growing above their crypts, or Tyranid hive fleets devouring the very planets that house their tombs. But few scenarios are as simultaneously frustrating and absurd as discovering your ancient resting place has become an orc settlement. Your priceless treasures converted into crude weapons or decorations. Your carefully maintained systems damaged by greenskin. Improvements. For those who study the endless conflicts of the Warhammer 40,000 universe, these Necron-Orc confrontations provide insight into both species' nature. They show us Necrons at their most vulnerable, forced to fight at disadvantage before they can fully mobilize, facing an enemy that exploits every weakness in their carefully planned defenses. They show us Orks at their most dangerous, a force that cannot be reasoned with or deterred, that treats ancient alien technology as loot to be stolen, rather than power to be feared. They also remind us that in a galaxy where war is eternal and peace is measured in brief intervals between conflicts, no plan survives contact with reality, no security is absolute, and no species, no matter how advanced or powerful, can truly rest easy. The Necrons learned this lesson the hard way, waking from their 60 million year sleep to discover that sometimes the most dangerous thing in the galaxy is not sophisticated technology or dark gods or galaxy-devouring hive fleets. Sometimes, the most dangerous thing is simply an orc who sees something shiny and decides he wants it. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of Warhammer 40,000's most chaotically inevitable scenarios, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. There are countless more stories of war, technology, and cosmic absurdity waiting to be explored in the grim darkness of the far future, and your support helps us bring them to you. The Emperor protects, the tomb worlds awaken, and the Orks keep looting. Such is the way of the galaxy, now and forever.